Okay.
There we go. Can you see me okay? Oh, I got my dog picture in the back.
Hello, it's so good to have you here. Thank you for joining in time. You actually got in like immediately I started.
I was sitting here waiting, to be fair. I was like, I'll be ready for this.
Okay, so we're ready actually.
Great. Yeah,
So we'll just do, like a quick intro and then we'll get right into the questions
sure.
and everything.
Sorry. Trying to figure
So
out where to put you. Sorry about that. Okay, there we go. Yeah, cool.
okay, okay. So I know Jen to be an economic abuse expert who has, 10 years of experience, and this is something you have been doing for years. This is something you have done so much research on. I also know that you're currently doing your PhD in the
Yeah.
University of Glasgow. Yeah. So, aside that, what other thing do you want to share with us today? Just any other thing you feel like we should take notes about you?
Oh, I don't think you need to take notes about me. I think that introduction was great, Heritage. Yeah, I mean, my name's Jen. Like Heritage said, I've been active in the domestic abuse or domestic violence sector in Scotland for the last 10 years, and I've been doing research and then different roles and policy, as well as like frontline work and practice. And yeah, and through that, I've really come across economic abuse quite a bit. And like you said, I'm finishing my PhD at the University of Glasgow, which focuses specifically on economic abuse. And that's kind of the first study in Scotland that we have around this form of abuse. So that's where I am. And what I spend my days doing is research, so finishing the PhD, working at the University of Glasgow, and then I'm also a consultant where I work with different bodies like councils or banks as well, financial institutions, or domestic abuse charities and other stakeholders, other organizations that support victim survivors to get them to understand economic abuse and what we can do, what we can respond to, how we identify it, and how we respond to it.
Mm. Thank you so much. That is such, elaborate introduction. Thank you. And I think it's also really interesting that you train people in banks, because that is actually how I got to know about your work and everything that you do from Tribe. And they mentioned that you specifically train people in the bank. I don't know if you just mind sharing like why the bank, especially when it comes to economic
Yeah.
abuse.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I'm actually, probably with the work that I do, I'm the most proud of the work that I've done and I've been able to do in banks. And with economic abuse, so one of the ways that an abusive partner can get this control over you and this power over you is through controlling your bank account. So even if you yourself work, even if you have your own income, it could be the case that the perpetrator controls your account, controls your access to your account, removes money from it, removes money from the account, takes out loans or takes out credit cards in your name. So, people who have been doing research and have been supporting victim survivors of economic abuse have been saying, actually, do the banks have a responsibility here to really spot what's going on, because they can see everything. They can see all of our personal information and the way our bank account work and all these other things. So it's really important that if we can get them to identify something's not quite right, or if a victim survivor comes forward and says, I've experienced this, banks can actually go, oh yeah, we can see that this happened with the account, or the version of your event that you're telling us is true, and how can we further assist you? So one of the big outcomes of economic abuse, one thing, it really interferes with your ability to leave the abusive partner because they strip you of all your resources. And the other thing is that you often end up with coerced debt. And by coerced debt, I mean, so the perpetrator's taken out loans, credit cards in your name, has run up debt in your name that you may or may not know about, or you've been forced to do it yourself. So a lot of women said, in my research, well, I had no access to cash, I had no access to my income, so I took out a secret credit card and I was putting my bills and buying milk and all these other things on my credit card. But then, of course, if you don't have any access to money, you yourself can't pay off that credit card, right? So the debt keeps building and keeps building. So in order to respond to that and saying, look, this is what's happening to people, it's a form of abuse. It's happening against their will. They have no control over it. But the consequences of debt can be really, really hard, and you can really struggle to get out from underneath it. So banks have, thankfully in the UK, banks have taken it on. And it's, you know, something that we continuously keep working on to be in conversations with them, to say, what can we do around coerced debt? What do you need to know in order to assist? And yeah, it's really, really incredible, some of the responses that we're seeing.
Well, amazing, amazing. And it's really interesting because here in Nigeria, we are trying to get banks on board to have like a policy in place, not even because we don't have laws, and that's like the major problem. We don't have laws supporting, you know, a policy creation of some sort. But if there is a policy on, you know, curbing economic abuse, and the banks actually take responsibility, you know, but for now they feel like, okay, you know what, this is a family matter, so anything that happens, you know, with your money, it's actually your concern and your business. So before we get into the questions, I just want to make some things clear. You know the definition of economic abuse. I'm going to read right from the book here, so it's not
Go for
it. Most people say economic abuse is an invisible form of domestic violence. This is because it is not seen. You know, it's not something you notice till you pay attention. And that is why, as a community, we have a responsibility of, you know, acting like this is not something just one group can do, or just one NGO, or just Jenn, you know, being an economic abuse expert. So it's something everyone has to come together to achieve. And so yeah, that's the major thing. It's invisible, so you have to pay close attention. The second thing is, it is a deliberate pattern of control in which individuals interfere with their partner's ability to acquire, use, and maintain economic resources. So the word economic resources is wholesome because it captures their income. If you're working, you're earning money, and then you are forced to give all of that to your partner, or your partner is actually forcing you to work. I heard of a case here in Nigeria of a gospel singer. Unfortunately, she died. But that was the first thing that she noticed was happening in her home. The fact that she was forced to go to certain events, make money, and then give the money to her husband. And then, you know, that was the first thing before the physical abuse actually started. And so most times it's closely followed, you know, and, you know, people ignore it at first and just say, oh, you know what, it's just money. I can always make money all the time. And, you know, but over time it gets more intense and life-threatening. The statistics we have here in Nigeria, 51.2, which is incredibly high. And that means that there's also a gap in data. That means that we don't even have enough information on how serious this issue is in Nigeria, mostly because people are not aware that it is an issue. People are not sensitized about it. So, okay, now we've covered that. So the first question...
It was a good summary. Yeah, it was really good. Yeah, and you're so right. I mean, everything from the invisible form, you know, when we have the same thing, when we look at domestic abuse or domestic violence, depending on how it's being defined in the country that you're in, you know, we say, oh, invisible, because people are oftentimes looking for physical abuse and or even sexual abuse, where there is, you know, the evidence looks different. Whereas if money comes and goes, you know, how do you prove that? And like you said, even if you don't have a bank account, how can I then show you how this has happened? And you're right, it's very, very subtle. And I have to say, I'm no expert by any stretch of the imagination on Nigeria, but the data everywhere, like this is a form of abuse that we've known about for quite some time, but we're just really getting around to researching it. So, you know, it's great that there already is some data on there, and, you know, we've got limited data within the UK as well. So I would just say, like, keep going with that as well. Don't go, oh, we don't have anything. Everyone's kind of at the start of this. Everyone's just really finding out about it. But yeah, go ahead with the question. Sorry.
Thank you. The first is, how can you, as a person, like in a case where someone is being abused and they want to come out of it, what's the first thing you would say in that situation? And from your experience, you can share and yeah.
Yeah. So someone's experiencing economic abuse and wants to leave that
Yeah.
relationship. Is that okay? Is that the question? I think first and foremost, it is always about safety. So economic abuse rarely occurs in isolation, which means that there will be other forms of abuse that will be going on alongside it, whether it's emotional, physical, psychological. So there's often a lot of danger attached to it. And you hit the nail on the head when you said that often it's the first time, the first form of abuse as well, and then things can escalate from there. So if someone is starting to identify that, something's not quite right here, they might not be calling it domestic abuse. They might not be calling it abuse at all. Certainly not economic abuse. Like I said, we're at the start of this, so people don't necessarily have the vocabulary around defining what's happening to them, especially with money. Some people are really used to not having a lot of money, and then they think, well, this is really no different from before I met my partner or whatever it might be. So the real and first and foremost issue is around safety. Is it safe? Are you thinking about perhaps you would like to leave this relationship? You want to come out of this relationship? The thing that you need to consider, and every victim survivor will know this, is around your own safety, and if there's any children in the house, the safety of the children as well. So is it safe to leave if that's what you want to do? A lot of victim survivors say that they actually don't want to leave the relationship, they just want the abuse to end. So there's mixed information around that in terms of how effective that is and if you really can then mend that relationship and remain in that relationship, or have that discussion with the abusive partner to say, this is not working, this is unhealthy, I don't want to, continue in this way. It really depends on where the relationship is. And that's kind of the answer to your question as well. If you've identified that you need to leave, there are things that you can do, including keeping yourself safe, trying to maybe save money and put that aside so that you have just the essentials, just a little bit of money in order to get out the door and do that, if that's what you want to do, and if you believe that that's the safest thing for you to do. But as you've explained with the definition of economic abuse, it's about that other person controlling your finances and your other resources. So it's really, really hard to get your savings together and to get that pot of money together to then actually leave. So looking about for support, maybe confiding in a friend or a family member if you trust them, if you still have, a relationship with them, and kind of saying, this is what's been going on, I don't feel safe anymore. Or even if you go on to borrow little bits of money or ask for favors in order to just make sure that you and the children are okay and have all your essentials, because that's what economic abuse does. It strips you of your essentials. And the other thing that I want to say with, trying to kind of with the relationship, you just want to know that this happens to a lot of people, and it's not happening to you for any specific reason or that you did anything wrong. In fact, it is done to you. It's something that you are being subjected to, as opposed to something that you have caused in any way, shape, or form, which is, of course, what the perpetrator wants you to believe. That this is all your fault, or that you deserve it, or that they really do need to control you and you're just not very good with money. So trying to break through that and starting to reach out for help and thinking about, if you want to stay, there's services, there's support around you remaining in that relationship, making sure you and the children are safe. But if you want to leave, there's equally options for you available.
Thank you so much. I think that was what I addressed some days ago with some of my friends, just talking to them and saying that in Nigeria, we have this blaming mentality. We blame the woman and say, why didn't you leave? When you start getting beaten, like, why didn't you just go and just walk out the door? And it's not easy, actually, especially when you have children in the mix, when you have people who are dependent on you. So, if you are walking out the door, you are losing something. You are either leaving your children behind, or you are living with the children with no option of how to take care of them.
Yeah.
So economic abuse is restrictive, especially when they start getting beaten or anything. It's I feel like, as a society, everyone listening, it's insensitive to say, why didn't you leave? Because at the end of the day, there are so many there's so many things involved with living. And I like that you actually left it open and saying that, there are options, there are always options. And that's what people, women need to be assured of, the fact that they are not alone and that there are so many systems in place to actually help them when they need the help.
Absolutely. And I mean, that is not specific to Nigeria. Everyone has this victim blaming. Every country I've ever heard of has victim blaming, where it's the woman's fault, right? Where we have somehow done something to cause this. Instead of looking at the perpetrator, instead of looking at what is going on here and why have you done this. And you said the whole, why doesn't she just leave? That's what got me started on my research journey, and that is the question of my research. Well, why doesn't she just leave? And the answer is it's related to safety. It's incredibly dangerous to leave, but also it's closely tied to economic resources. And if you've been in a relationship, it doesn't really matter how long. It can be months, and this can happen over a few months. It can be decades. That's the purpose of it, is to remove your resources from you. So even if you think today about, any of you walking out the door with absolutely nothing, and part of economic abuse, your documents could be removed, your ID could be removed, you have no access to money, you might not have access to your phone. I mean, we're all doing this on the phone right now, right? Think about how important that is. All the resources that you would require to walk out the door and then also rebuild your life and be safe. And there's a lot of them. So I would never, it's always related to safety, and that person knows best what the option is. So, oftentimes we hear that police ask the same question, support services ask the same question. Well, if things are so bad, why don't you just leave? And we're really trying to come away and just say, look at everything that's required to leave and how dangerous it is. Because economic abuse doesn't stop when you leave. It continues after you've left as well. So you're also then faced with that.
Very true. Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. That was really on point. So right to the next question. You've mentioned that definitely economic abuse is hardly in isolation. So what do you think are the early signs of economic abuse? What's that? What are the pointers? Yes.
Yeah, so early signs, it really varies from person to person. So this happens to women who have a lot of resources, a very high income, and women, everyone in between. So it's really hard to say, okay, this is what you need to look for, X, Y, and Z. But some of the research has indicated that, there's oftentimes real pressure to move in together. So the person kind of coercing you or really like pushing you to like, let's live together, let's live together, let's live together. And then you finally go, okay, yes. But also, it's very romantic. The person wants to live with you. It shows that, the relationship is quite serious and it's moving in the right direction, right? All these cultural and societal things that we think about relationships. So oftentimes that kind of first coercion of like, let's live together, put me on the deed of the house or the deed of the apartment, wherever you might live, and trying to kind of already start to control that access to it. And then the big thing as well is when they start to maybe question you about your money, asking a lot of questions, how you spend it, why you do this, trying to start to take control over it. A lot of women have said, they then start to remove money. So also, asking for money without ever having the intention of returning it. And then you also see kind of that introduction around, emotional and psychological abuse. And it's like, well, why don't I just do this? And why don't I just handle the money? So early signs really vary on your resources as well, and where you are with the relationship. But other clues are they stop you from having money, they stop you from having access to it, or make you responsible for like showing receipts, questioning how you spend your money. They refuse to contribute, so you have moved it together, and they're like, well, I'm not paying any of the bills. I'm not doing any of that. So that refusal to contribute, stealing your cash, putting everything in your name, as well as putting everything in their name. So you're responsible for everything, every bill, getting the food, preparing the food, buying the groceries, paying all the bills, paying the rent, covering debt, all these things, where it's just slowly that you see the balance is starting to shift in relation to how things, should be 50-50. And again, it's different culturally, but you want to aim for that 50-50. But if that person is really starting to tip the scales, maybe raising an eyebrow. A big one that a lot of people don't actually think about is your mail. So if you are used to having your mail and all of a sudden, you've noticed I've not seen a bill in a long time, or I've not been getting my correspondence about, in the UK we have council tax and all these things. Actually looking at that, because what perpetrators need to do is cut you off from your sources of information, right? And that's how you get to build up your debt. That's where you realize, well, you can go and say to your landlord, well, you haven't sent through the rent. And the landlord's, yes, I have. But of course, because they're interfering with your mail, that's a really, really good sign. So if you haven't seen your mail in a little while, maybe go to the bank if you have a bank account and you're expecting to see something. Nowadays, a lot of stuff is online, so you can also check it through that if you still have access to your phone. But maybe raising an eyebrow and asking around that, and just going, I haven't seen my bills in a while, or I haven't heard anything from this company or the internet provider that I used to hear a lot from. And checking in again, if it's safe to do so, checking in and asking some questions.
Thank you so much. I've never heard about that mail one, but it's yeah, it makes sense because isolation is one major thing that they actually, what's the word? Gain their confidence in. So you mostly find out that sometimes these perpetrators are actually very observant. They try to notice the situation around you. Do you have supportive friends? Do you have supportive family? Do you have a source of information? For example, if you have a personal assistant, you might notice that, he just says, oh, I don't like this personal assistant. I don't like the way she looks. I think you should hire another one. I think you should fire this assistant or this person close to you. I don't like the way this person is always, in your business. Then that should actually raise a sign that something is off here.
Oh yeah, isolation is a big part of, we call it coercive control of getting that person on their own. And again, moving in together is very, very good for doing that, because especially if the relationship's new, you're maybe all loved up and you want to spend all this time with that person, you want to be with them and every minute's magical and all these things. And even when you experience, when you are with an abusive partner, the majority of women will say, everything at the start was wonderful. He was lovely, he was kind, he was caring. Because of course, if the warning signs had been there immediately, the relationship really wouldn't have moved on necessarily, right? You would go immediately like, oh my goodness. So what they need to do is kind of, bring them into their world and make you their world and you make them their world. And then it's the isolation that really, really matters. And that's why a lot of victim survivors struggle, because friends they're not, friends are like, what, I've tried calling you, you're not answering, we keep asking you out, but you never come out, and we don't really like him that much, so we're not going to come around as much as we used to. And that isolation is key, because if you have this one person who's controlling everything in your life, and that's the only person that you get any feedback from, right? Then you start to believe that. You start to go, oh yeah, no, my friends don't really like you, and you're right, I love you, and you're more important than my friends, or, oh yeah, my mom doesn't like you, it keeps going and going. But that isolation is really, really effective. And that's why being supportive, if you are a friend, if you're suspecting something, being supportive and being there and listening and just letting people know, like, I understand, you're busy, it's a new relationship, but I am here if you need me, is really, really powerful.
Wow, that's you've actually answered one of the other questions, but we'll go back to So the next question is on, okay, so we just have 2 questions left. So everyone who is, I can see and thank you all so much. And if you have questions, please use the question tag or make your comments. I'm seeing everything, and I want to just thank you for being here. The next question is with culture and tradition. So how much do you think that plays into economic abuse generally, curbing it, ending it, yeah.
How much time do we have? It's massive. It's absolutely massive. So again, there's no culture, there's no country that I can think of where we have reached gender equality, and that's everything. So I can speak more precisely to the UK and the situation here. But women still are economically unequal compared to men. Like if you compare, a female solicitor and a male solicitor, there's always going to be a gap in terms of income, in terms of equality. And the messaging that we get around money from a very, very early age is gendered. So if you think about women's magazines, you know, it's a lot of it is pitched to us as, you know, get the best bargain, do the savings, figure out how to do, you know, how to be careful spenders, you know, or even fashion magazines. It's like, here's the best deal, get the best deal, you know, do the right thing. Whereas men, the way that we pitch finances and money to men, it's all about investing. You know, it's all about conquering, and you can do this. And even if you look at stock portfolios, you know, like I think less than 50% of women in the UK invest in the stock market because we don't get talked to about money. It's just one of those things. And I noticed it myself when I was growing up that, you know, I went to university and my male friends had a lot of really good insight on finances and how to do X, Y, and Z with credit cards. And the fact is, like, I was like, oh, where did you get all this information from? Why has no one talked to me about that? But then there's also, there's the financial messaging already from a very early age that we are savers. We need to be careful. We need to be, you know, look for the best bargain, whereas men always get to invest and buy and all these things. But then there's also the gender roles and the gender stereotypes around money. So I think we will have all heard the saying, you know, the man of the house or the head of the household. And that is incredibly prevalent across all sorts of countries and all cultures, where it's his house, it's his rules. You know, we do the cleaning and the washing. And that's still the case in 2023. No matter how successful you are, if you're the woman in the household, you're probably doing more domestic and unpaid labor than your male counterpart. So that is another reason why economic abuse can hide so well, because we're only a few generations removed from, you know, women belong in the kitchen. But if you still have that mindset, and if that's not been challenged, that's a very effective tool to, again, go, I'm the head of the house, the man's always in charge of the money, you do the budgeting, but like I'm in charge of the big decisions. So in terms of a cultural aspect, it's massive. And even like with my research participants, their ages varied massively from 65 right down to 21. And all generations are saying the same thing. They just kind of, when they got into the relationship, fell into this natural rhythm of the man being in charge of the household. And this was women who were very successful in their work, had incredible income, everything across the board. It didn't really matter, where it was just like, okay, you're in charge. So you can then see how easy it is to take over the finances and the household management and just go, you do this and I do that, and we split it up again. And one of the other examples of that is the fact that we see a real increase not only in domestic abuse, but economic abuse specifically around pregnancy. So again, incredibly gendered. If you're going on maternity leave and your partner goes, I'll just take care of that. I'll handle this. You put your feet up, you're pregnant. It all sounds really great. And then they start to take more control, more control. Depending on the country that you're in, your maternity leave might be very short. The US has 6 weeks of maternity leave. So you can imagine if you're still recovering physically from that and they start to control your finances, how to bounce back from that. It can be really, really difficult. So cultural messaging from a very early age and gender stereotypes play into this massively. And it's something that, again, you know, you said right at the beginning, Heritage, we really need to all work on this. And that's true. So from a very early age in terms of education, that's where we need to be. And everyone talks about, you know, let's talk about money with kids. And it's like, yes, but let's also do it equally so that everyone gets the same understanding of you can invest, you can do this. But also, if you worked, you're in charge of your money. And if anyone else comes along and tries to tell you otherwise, then it's a bit of a red flag.
So true. I really love the fact that you mentioned education, because right here in Nigeria, there's this wave of trying to educate the female gender, you know, girls in schools about money, saving, investment, because that's how we need to think. That's how we need to frame our minds. And it's funny because people say, oh, why are you learning about this? And, you know, stay in the kitchen or something. Or I feel things like cooking, equally cooking, saving, investing. I think this is something we shouldn't be saying male or female. It's survival skills. Yeah, literally. You need to know how to spend your money. You need to know how to invest. You know, take risk, and you know, try to be a very good investor. Build up your portfolio. You know, all that. And then also you should learn how to cook because you like good meals. It doesn't have to be deeper than that. So Okay, the last
Yep.
question before we speak, I think we already have one question. Oh, this is actually for my mom.
Okay.
So, yeah,
All right. Hi, Mom.
so, so, the last one is, how do we get help? I mean, this is typically, this is going to be your opinion. Okay, so I want it to be in two ways. How do you think we should get help? You know, everybody should get help. What do you think the system should be like for helping survivors of economic
Mhm.
abuse? And on the flip side, what do you think is being done now? Like, what are the systems in place? I know you talked about banks in the beginning, which is exceptionally,
Yeah.
intelligent. I think the first time I actually had this inspiration to create awareness of economic abuse in Nigeria was when I was in the UK last year. I saw this banner by Satanda Bank,
Mm-hmm.
um, talking about economic abuse and how you can report. And I literally, because I was waiting for a bus, I literally missed the bus because I was staring at the billboard and I was like, well, wow, this is strange. Like, I've never seen anything like that before. That was my first time. I went home, I did all my research, and then I
Mm-hmm.
started working on this. And yeah, so far so good. We've done a lot in creating awareness, and we'll continue to do so as an organization, her dream initiative. That's what we intend to do for the whole of the year. But what do you think the system should be for help? How do you think people should get
Yeah.
help here?
I mean, we've touched on so many different things. We talked about mail, right? We talked about mail. We talked about banks, and employers and everything. So really, this requires a systems response across a variety of different systems. So just from like a personal perspective, I spend a lot of my day talking to lawyers. I spend a lot of my day talking to the police. I spend a lot of my days talking to utility companies, going, this was worse, like this was not this person. And the effect, if we don't address it or if we don't help in some way, can be devastating because if you've ever had any debt, you know exactly how hard it is to come out from underneath that debt. I have student loans. I still haven't finished paying them. And it's just like this can really affect everything that you do in your life going forward. So we need a systems response. And you've already said it, so you gave yourself your own answer. It is first and foremost about the awareness raising around this. It's something that we've known about. It's been in different resources since kind of the mid 80s, but we're just really coming around to it now and learning about it. So we just need, for the start, all this awareness, and we need everyone to be on the same page. So we need people to know the definition, whatever country you're in, whatever definition you want to apply to it, great. And to know that this matters, and it matters on many different levels. I mean, on a personal level, obviously, but even if the domestic legislation or domestic policies are not looking to address this, at the UN level, this matters as well. So we have conventions. We have the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights Convention, which talks about education. It talks about income. It talks about the right to work. So, you can go and take that to a higher level, but awareness is key. There's still, yeah, the banks are doing a fantastic job. It's not all banks. Some of them still won't touch this. But it's, at the moment, the response that you get if you do report this to anyone, it can be very mixed. It's very inconsistent. So the awareness raising is huge. In terms of responding, it's literally about listening and believing. And I mean that for anyone. I mean that if that's your friend or your cousin or your mom or whoever it might be, or if you're a bank or if you're a lawyer, it's about listening and believing and seeing what that experience was like and the impact that it's having. When I was working within banks, the customers that came forward were never really looking for, like, I want all my money back and I want this, this, and this. They wanted to be listened to, they wanted to be believed, and they wanted to go, is there any way that you can help me? Because I can't come out from underneath this debt. I need to sell my house. I need to do so. That is incredibly powerful in and of itself, is listening, believing, and then responding within your capabilities. No one is asking or looking for a free handout. They're looking at justice for a form of abuse that they've experienced. And depending on what country you're in the UK, we're very lucky, it is a crime in the UK. But we have a lot of work to do. It's in our domestic abuse policies, it's in our legislation, but again, the response and the awareness is very inconsistent. So I think the more that people know, the more that we start that education about finances, we start having this conversation about healthy relationships and what this looks like. And of course, it can never be 50-50. I think one person will always earn more than the other, but it's about having that healthy conversation about your finances early on. So in an ideal world, I would like everyone to know about this. I don't know if that will help necessarily prevent it, because again, this is someone who really wants to do this to you. This is someone who has decided this is what they're going to do. It doesn't happen by accident. It's by design. And then looking at, okay, how can we help that person recover? But the awareness is key. At the moment, women themselves or victim survivors themselves are not identifying it. And depending on where they go, they might also not get the awareness and the response that they need. But like I said, we're at the start. So it's not a bad thing. It's actually really, really exciting, because I'm talking to you from Scotland, to Nigeria, and we're having this conversation where we say, we know about this, and it's time we do something about it.
Thank you so much. That has been, so extensive. I'm sure everyone here is learning. And so thank you. We've covered all the questions, and we already have 2 from everyone listening live. So the first one, which I said was by my mom, she was asking what happens on the flip side, if it is a woman against the man. Yeah, so that comes, because gender balance. We have to also acknowledge that it also happens, to men, women, taking total control of everything. How do they get out of it? I think it's even worse for men, because there's already a stigma attached that men cannot be abused in any way, because they are strong and they can conquer anything. So stigma already. And then the second question is, with institutions, how far and okay, let me look at the question once again. For institutional interference, how much and how far should be done by institutions? I think if I get this question, the correct interpretation, trying to talk about the family versus there's always that gray line between, oh, this is a family matter and this is something that should be handled by the government and institutions in place. So what's the balance? So you can just, yeah.
Okay, so the first question was about men and if this happens to men and what we can do about that. So yeah, absolutely. Like I said at the start, anyone can be a victim survivor. Anyone can experience domestic abuse, regardless of ethnicity, income, socioeconomic background. Religion, it spans everything, and that includes men. And you're absolutely right. There is real stigma. As we said, there's always victim blaming, right? We do hear a lot of, why doesn't she just leave? But men also experience that, absolutely. Where it's, there are, again, I always say the patriarchy doesn't really serve anyone, because the stereotypes that exist for women also exist for men. So the patriarchy is not really helping men and saying you need to be strong and this doesn't happen to you. I do think it is probably much harder for them to identify, because again, it's, who do you speak to? And I'm saying my wife spends, and she also, emotionally abuses me about not contributing enough. And so what does that look like? We need far more data about how this occurs across different intersections. We need a lot of our data is from the US and from the UK. It's predominantly with women and is predominantly with heterosexual women. So we need so much more information about what this looks like in different communities. What does this look like in all sorts of relationships, and especially with men? And what are their barriers to accessing support? So we do have very good systems set up, thanks to the women's movement and feminist movements across different countries, to get support for victim survivors. And as I said, it's not perfect for women at this point in time, but we definitely need to be having that conversation about how this looks for men and what the responses need to be for men, and also encouraging them to come forward and to break down those stereotypes that they have against them as well, in terms of a big strong man, this doesn't happen, and look at your wife taking charge and things like that. So it really matters that we have this conversation with everyone in order to protect them and to let them know that responses are available.
Thank you so much. So I hope my mom has gotten the answer that she wants.
Yeah, I mean, she can text me. But it does. Yeah, it does. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, okay. You were actually saying
Oh
something.
no, I
I
was saying
think I cut you off.
it does happen to men, and we don't have the data. We need to know what's happening. And if the forms are different, I mentioned some of the forms like withholding money, taking your money, taking away your assets, not allowing you access to bank accounts. Does this look different? And does this look different in same-sex relationships? What does it look like? What's the dynamic? And we're just not there with the research. The research is all very new,
Yeah.
kind of started around 2008 onwards, which seems like a long time, but in terms of research is absolutely nothing, because we just don't have that. So we need far more information so that we can respond to everyone effectively.
Okay. Thank you so much. I can see her dream initiative, dropping comments, Bukumi, Intola, definitely everyone. Thank you so much for your comments. Thank you for being here. The last question, which was talking about institutions,
Yeah.
yes. So you could just go ahead and tackle that and then, yeah.
So it's talking about, why should the government step in and do something about that? Is that what the question is?
Yes, the gray line between this is a family matter and this is something that the government should actually handle. I think the same applies because that is why we have so many gaps in the laws in Nigeria. It would surprise you to know that marital rape is not recognized in Nigeria. So a lot of people believe, as long as you're married, you know, you you do not have control over yourself and you do not have a will, you do not have a mind of your own anymore. I think largely it has some religious backgrounds and roots, but I
Mhm.
also think there's been a stretch and it is not being addressed because no one wants to exactly step on toes and say no, this is how it should be. So we do not have laws on marital rape. We do not have laws on economic abuse as well. And I think this is majorly because of the policy intervention. So many people have not done so much research, and I like that you mentioned data because we do not have so much data on economic abuse. So people really, the first instinct is just to say, oh, you know what, we have so many things. We have poverty, we have water supply, we have
Yeah.
so many things to tackle, and let's just leave that for now. So what do you think the institution, how far do you think institutions should go in addressing these issues?
Yeah, I mean, it is, again, talking about systems, we can look at criminal justice systems as well. Everyone's got, their role to play in this. I'm quite lucky. I'm in a country that has recognized domestic abuse as a crime, and coercive and controlling behavior is criminalized under our laws, through our laws, and we're just really coming. That didn't happen until 2019. So we're also coming to terms with, okay, what does this look like? We know about coercive control, we know about isolation and what this looks like, but what's the evidence? Again, do we need to corroborate this in any way, and what does that look like? So I can say personally, I am a big believer in institutions stepping in and seeing that they have a role to play here, because as you said, with things like marital rape, again, that was also legal in the UK until I believe the 1980s or the 1990s. Don't quote me on that. I'd have to check the exact date, but it was relatively recent where the UK also said, actually, no. This, you can be raped in marriage if it's against your will, if you have not given consent, which we should be getting every single time. There is such a thing as being able to rape your wife. But that's relatively recent law. So I do believe that institutions have a serious role to play in this. And like I said, I'm lucky that we have the legislation in place and the policies in place. And it's really about where we are with that narrative around domestic abuse, because it is normalized, and it's normalized across so many countries and throughout so many cultures where this is a private matter. And we were right there. We were there until the 1960s with the first wave of the women's, the Western feminist women's movement, where they said this is not a private matter. It is simply not a private matter. It is a crime. If you do this to anyone else out in the street, it's going to be a crime. So why, when you close the door and you do this to your wife or to your husband, is it no longer considered a crime? So, there's always that fear of the government overstepping and overreaching and everything. But in this case, I personally don't really think they can go far enough. And international law has said that, domestic law has said that as well. And economic abuse is just one aspect of that. But I think, with your example in Nigeria, there seems to be, with currently no legislation and no policies in place to say all of this is a crime. I think drawing on the larger international legislation to see what's being said there and good practice, and even if culture is being given as an excuse for why this is happening, digging down into that and looking at changes that are available through that. So I'm a big believer, just because I think it is a crime and that no one should ever be subjected to this in any way, shape, or form, or not be allowed to recover from it. But it does require that baseline understanding that this is a crime.
Thank you so much. So we've tackled all the questions, and I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your time. I'm sure I've actually learned a lot. I've just been, writing notes over here and learning. And I hope everyone learns, one or two things. The aim of this life is so that we create awareness, and also that we realize that we have a role to play. Everyone here has a role to play. You can be that supportive friend, be that supportive family that doesn't, judge or pushes them aside and say, you know what, deal with this with your husband or settle it. Be that friend that, takes it personal and takes it up, because at the end of the day, that's kindness. That's what societal development is all about, being kind to one another, truly loving your neighbor. Okay, I'm beginning to preach now. Already used to that. So thank you so much for your time. I'm really grateful, for the back and forth. We ended up having this, and I'm so excited. We're going to send this out to be on Her Dream Initiative's page, so everyone could, rewatch or send the link to someone to just have a listen. And thank you. I think we've handled everything. Is there any other thing you want to say? Any other comments before
No. Just thank you so much for the opportunity and for organizing all of this and getting me to do Insta Live. I wasn't quite sure I could do it. But you were brilliant. You walked me through everything. So no, I'm just so excited about the work that you're doing, and how passionate you are about raising awareness of this issue, and it really shows. So hopefully this was in some ways helpful. If not, you know where to find me. You can always come back for more. And yeah, if there's any questions or any comments or concerns, please do let me know, and I'll be more than happy to answer those and stay in touch. I'd love to hear how things continue, and yeah, doors always open. Or Instagram's always on. I don't know.
Thank you so much, Jen. Thank you everyone for joining. I can see the comments. Thank you. Goodbye, Jen. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thanks everyone. Have a nice night. Bye-bye.